Okay, hope everyone is well. Today is the last history lesson of the week. We're going to continue the work on ideologies, and we're going to focus. We're going to go over the stuff about autocracy, and then we're going to focus on Lenin and the rise of Lenin and his ideology. Okay, so from the last session we had, if that's the right word, we were working and looking through the booklet on ideologies, and we're doing all about the czars and autocracy. And what you should all know is what the fundamentals of autocracy were. You should have looked at Russification as part of that, this idea that everyone in Russia should try to be Russian. And you should also have looked at some of the ideas and policies of the czars and how there were some subtle changes within autocracy with these last three czars. So just to summarise it, you should know that Alexander II tried to reform autocracy in order to make it survive. He believed in autocracy, he believed it should continue, he just saw the need for some necessary changes, and we should know about the emancipation, for example, and some of the reforms to the Zemstva, and some of the reforms to the judiciary, that type of stuff. But as well, he did actually enact Russification, especially in places like Kazakhstan and those sorts of areas. Think about Poland with the Polish uprising as well, how he was quite harsh against them. His son Alexander III, he was more conservative, so he reversed some of Alexander's reforms, and he again was a strong believer in autocracy, but he didn't really see the need to change it particularly. He did make some changes, which you saw from those policies. He was quite influenced by this Mr. Pop character, whose name I can't say, Mr. Popadmanayev or something. Okay, Mr. Pop. He was very much a conservative, very much against the idea of Russia ever abandoning autocracy for things like democracy. He said democracy was a great lie, for example. And then, of course, Mr. Pop was in charge of educating Alexander III's son, the next Tsar, Nicholas II, which again might suggest where some of his kind of ideas came from. Speaking of Nicholas II, again, you should have come across on that PowerPoint and some of those policies of his changes. So, for example, 1905 was a crucial rule. So Nicholas II comes in, like his father, conservative, maintaining autocracy, didn't want to make any changes to autocracy. He kind of saw the negative consequences of making changes, like his father did regarding Alexander II. However, in 1905, Russia gets involved in a war with Japan. The Russians believe they can win it easily, and they actually get heavily defeated. Their entire navy is virtually wiped out. This actually leads to an uprising in Russia, and it's unclear actually whether Nicholas was actually deposed or not for a brief period of time, but certainly he's forced to make big concessions, and in 1905 he's forced to sign or whatever the October Manifesto, and this promises things like there'll be an elected national parliament called the Duma, it'll be involved in lawmaking along with the Tsar. It's very much kind of a really big reform that's going to weaken the power of the Tsar and create more of a discussion with some kind of elected parliament or Duma. It's something which many of the liberals on the various Zemstva have been kind of calling for quite a while. Remember Alexander II back in that day before he was assassinated was talking about having some kind of constituency assembly, wasn't it? So October Manifesto, Nicholas is forced to agree to have these Dumas and stuff. The following year, in 1906, though, he's managed to put down the uprising. A lot of brutality is used, especially in the countryside areas. Lots of the peasants, for example, attacked noblemen's houses and things like that. Quite a lot of brutality takes place, but in 1906, the Tsar's very much back on the front foot again, and he passes something called the Fundamental Laws. And what the Fundamental Laws do, they basically say, okay then, we'll have the Duma, but actually I'll keep all the power, thank you. The Duma's a bit of a talking shop. So he kind of gets back a fair number of the powers which he kind of lost in 1905. Not all of them. The fact you've now got an elected Duma is a power in itself, but he's basically reneging on the October Manifesto and saying, right, power's back with my hands. So regarding that table, if I just think about the subtle changes to autocracy, you could say that Alexander II he was kind of forced to, through circumstances like the Crimean War, to make those reforms. But there again, but the initiative came from him, didn't it? And he said, we're going to make these reforms to allow autocracy to continue. Alexander III, much more conservative, saw the consequences of the reforms, i.e., the assassination of his daddy, in his opinion, and so again he had the initiative to try and make things a bit more conservative again. But they're very much doing it from their own kind of points, aren't they? They're not being forced into making these changes, so to speak. Alexander II was a bit more liberal, Alexander III a bit more conservative. Nicholas II, though, I would argue, was forced to make the changes. He was forced by this big uprising in 1905 to do the October Manifesto, which he clearly didn't like, because by 1906 he passed the fundamental laws to try and bring things back again. So again, there's a subtle change there, isn't there? But all three of them are trying to support autocracy. They all believe in autocracy, and they're all trying to manage it into the modern world, for want of a better phrase. So I hope that kind of subtlety is fairly clear, but that fundamental similarity is that they all believe in autocracy and the important parts of it. The October Manifesto is important for you to know about, and the fundamental laws are as well. There was an exam question asked once, I can't remember exactly what it was, on the lines of to what extent was the fundamental laws the greatest change in Russian government, 1855 to 1964, or something like that. It might have been October Manifesto they used. It was a question, and they had this bit as the key ingredient bit, if you like, of the question. So it is important that you do know a bit about it. Okay then, so hopefully that all makes sense of what you did, and hopefully this big PowerPoint from Liz, which she did, which in class we'd have done bits of and gone in and out of, hope it kind of makes sense, a bit about Mr. Pob, and then about Russification, this idea that try and make all Russians within the Russian Empire Russian. But when we come to do the thematic question, or the thematic topic on nationalities, we do a lot on Russification. So you don't need to know every last in and out of it at this particular moment in time, but it is a theme we'll, I say we, it'd be more you, we'll do. It's usually one of the end topics we do, but again, we'll come back to it in great detail later on. And one thing about doing this topic thematically, I sometimes think it's like making like I don't know, like making like tartan or something, one of those machines. You kind of go across and do one colour, then you come across and do a different colour, then you come across and do a third colour. It's a bit like that. We do the government, then we come back again, then we'll start it all again with the economy, and everything kind of links in. So quite a lot of what we'll say is to say, oh, we'll do more about this when we do about that topic or that topic. So Russification, so don't worry too much about it, but you need to know roughly what it is for the time being, and we'll do more of it later on. So what I want to focus on today is a little bit more on Nicholas II. Liz has a slide, I think it's slide 10, called Was Nicholas II a Weak Autocrat? This is getting into the idea I was talking about before, about how the previous two Tsars kind of acted to reform autocracy because they kind of wanted to. They kind of had some pressures behind it as well, but fundamentally they took the initiative. Whereas Nicholas II, you could argue, was kind of forced into actions by events. So just to kind of, just for you to kind of get to know Nicholas II a little bit more, I suppose. Using page 88 and 89 of Evans and Jenkins, that's in the chapter 4 bit. It's on Moodle. I think it says Evans and Jenkins chapter 4. I want you to do the evidence from those 2 pages to say that Nicholas was a weak Tsar, a weak autocrat, a bit crap basically, and what points to say actually he wasn't weak, he actually had a number of strengths to him. Okay, so hope that should be fairly straightforward. On that table in your work booklet, it had 2 bits at the bottom. How far did autocracy change, and did the PG promise a new ideology? Now, for how far did autocracy change, you have to use your opinion from what we've all talked about. Did autocracy change a great deal under these 3 Tsars, or did it not? Was it fundamentally the same with just a few twiggly edges that were changed, or did it change fundamentally under these 3 Tsars? So you have to kind of use your own judgment here and use some of your own knowledge to say how far or how much it changed or didn't change. Okay. Now, regarding the provisional government part, we actually do the PG in great detail. It's a bit like the Alexander II bit we did. It's kind of one of these interpretation areas. If you look on Moodle, there's a whole section on the PG. Did the PG promise a new ideology? Is the question on there. Just very quickly, the Provisional Government, when Nicholas II was kind of forced to abdicate, leave office, the Duma, which was in place, most of them had dispersed, and there was a small rump, if you like, a small number. I want to say it was 96, but I might be wrong on that number. But there was a small number of Duma people who refused to go, and they essentially formed the Provisional Government. First of all, they had someone called Prince Lvov in charge, and then later on they got rid of him and had someone called Kerensky in charge. Now, they were unelected. Well, I suppose they had been elected originally in like 1910 or something, but they weren't elected to run the country, so to speak. And what they kind of did is that they began this process of thinking, how can we make Russia more democratic? And they began this process of trying to create like a new assembly. Unfortunately for them, before they got round to actually creating this new assembly, it's when the Second Revolution takes place and Lenin kind of seizes power. So perhaps just find out a little bit about what they were planning to do. Evans and Jenkins have got stuff in it. The Access to History book has. Quick look on the PG section of the Moodle page, and you should be able to find it quite easily what they were planning to do. The point to make is they were planning to, but didn't actually do it. So in terms of what's the great change in Russian government in terms of ideology, well, you could say the PG themselves were unelected, and they didn't actually make the big change which they wanted to. But you might want to hint, say that they were planning to make this big change, but it never actually happened. Therefore, there was no change. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Right, so the main focus then, which we're going to look at, we'll start today and then look at in more detail next week, is basically the communists. Okay, now in terms of ideology, in many ways you could say there's quite big radical changes compared to autocracy. When autocracy believes that the Tsar was put there by God, he can basically do what he likes. There's a small elite running the show. Whereas in theory, under Marxism, you get rid of class, you get rid of the upper class, the elites of society, get rid of czars and counts and dukes and all the rest of them, and get rid of all the big industrialists, and the people run the country. So in theory, there's a really huge ideological difference. In practice, though, you end up still having one man in charge of the show. There's still a small elite around that one man in charge who kind of runs everything. So the theory is very different to the practice, if you like. And so, again, you can get that into essays. So what I want you to do is, if you look at Lizzie's PowerPoint, I'll bring it up on my computer, it basically it's slide, where is it? Slide 14 onwards, okay, it kind of goes over some of these key ideas of Marxism. Now, before the Easter holidays, you should have done about the 5 stages of Marxism. It can get very complicated, Marxism. The key thing to understand with Marxism, I think, is he believed that capitalism had kind of damaged human nature. It puts people into certain classes. And Marxism believes you get rid of all that. You get rid of social class, you get rid of capitalism, and that people should work for their own benefit, essentially, or for everybody else's as well. So rather than you spending all day toiling away at McDonald's, and then due to your work, they make a profit out of you, don't they? Because you sell 400 burgers or whatever, okay, yes, you get paid a certain amount of money, but it's not very much. Most of the money goes to Ronald McDonald, whatever his name is, in charge, and he makes an absolute fortune out of it. And they've kind of exploited you, haven't they? Okay, they've exploited your time and your talents, flipping burgers and stuff, in order for him to make loads of money. So Marxists kind of believe we get rid of all that, okay, and everyone should work communally. So you work in McDonald's, but then you'd all share the profits of McDonald's, and then you'd all get paid the same amount. there won't be like one person getting all of it and you like getting little scraps, if that kind of makes sense. I probably explained that quite poorly, but you get the general gist. So if you look at this PowerPoint, what Liz has done, she's kind of gone over the ideas of the Social Democrat Party and stuff in Russia. So as we know, Marx inspired some quite radical opposition to Alexander II, Alexander III, and Nicholas II. And what you saw in 1898, because Russia began to industrialize, you got more industrial workers in really poor conditions. And so in 1898, as slide 15 says, you had the Russian Social Democrat Workers' Party were formed. They're known as the SD. Okay, they were a revolutionary party. They followed the ideas of Karl Marx. Their idea was to bring about a full-blown revolution. We don't want what Britain has, a constitutional monarchy. What we want actually to get rid of the Tsar, get rid of the Dukes, get rid of the Counts, have some great big revolution. And their ideas were given relevance by the Great Spurt, this industrialization. We have these industrial workers for the first time in Russia, very poor conditions, in slums in Moscow and St. Petersburg and wherever else. Now, the problem, as slide 16 says, is that this party wanted this great big radical change. Of course, they had to hide lots of their activities because, of course, Alexander III and Nicholas II used the secret police to try and destroy them and stuff, because obviously they saw them as being a great threat. What you saw, though, within this group was a big ideological split. Now, this photo on page 16 shows some of the the key figures of the SD party. Okay, and in one square on the left-hand side, well, it's on the right-hand side, but the left-hand side is the right-hand side, if that makes sense. Okay, there's a pic, as you can see, Lenin, and it's a square around him, and he's got some of his ideas. Okay, and then on the far right, there's another square with a picture of another geezer, and it's got some of his ideas. Okay, basically what you had was the guy on the right and his key ideas. They wanted a revolution, but they wanted to go it slowly. They didn't want to have it tomorrow. What they wanted, if you like, was a slightly more peaceful kind of uprising. They wanted to work with other parties and other kind of revolutionary groups to try and create a broad kind of consensus of support to overthrow the Tsar. And they also believe that we should wait for the right time. Okay, what we should do is wait till the Tsar makes some great big massive mistake and his popularity falls. That will be the time to strike. They were quite keen that we should try and convince as many people as possible to get involved in this. They wanted a newspaper called the Iska. Okay, so basically what they want to do, they say we want the revolution, but we need to wait to the right time. We need to build up support before that revolution takes place. We need to speak to other political parties, other people with key ideas, in order to create a broad consensus. And then when the time is right, we can then strike and it's goodbye Tsar. Lenin, on the other hand, and his supporters, they said no. Okay. They said that it's too wishy-washy just to wait to the right time. The Tsar's got all the cards in his hand. He's got the secret police. He's got the army. If the Russian workers go on strikes, what happens? Well, the Tsar brings out the Russian army and they get crushed. What we need to do is act now, essentially. And he was quite keen that there should be an elite. So in 1902, he wrote this pamphlet or book called What's to Be Done. And in that pamphlet, he basically argues that the workers won't spontaneously become revolutionaries and become Marxists and overthrow the regime. He says they need to be educated to do that. And he essentially argues there should be a small elite who kind of run it, essentially. So he was arguing that we need to have this revolution. We don't need to wait. We need to get ourselves organised, and we need to have a small elite to coordinate all this, and we will work on behalf of the workers. The workers don't really know what they want. We do. So what we will do, we know that they would ideally like to have this revolution, so we will organise it, we will do it, and then he also argued that we will then run the regime once the Tsar is gone until a time when the workers can take control themselves. So it's a little bit like, tell him what his name was now. When we did about Alexander II and the opposition, and you had that more revolutionary group who were kind of real diehards who kind of, live or die to get rid of the Tsar and stuff. Well, he's on that kind of path. We need to have a dedicated group to have this revolution. There's no point speaking to other political parties who want this because they'll just make us compromise. We need no compromise, get rid of the Tsar, and we need to organise this from the centre by a small elite. And you can see how some of these ideas then actually kind of become important to how Lenin actually runs Russia once he does take control. In Brussels, which I think Liz has spelled wrong on that slide, on slide 17, there was a congress of this party, basically, and you saw a split that took place. You saw the likes of Lenin, okay, on the left-hand side. They said, we don't want to have this wishy-washy thing, and so they formed what became the Bolshevik Party. And then the more kind of, I won't say nice revolutionaries, not sure that's quite the right word, but the ones who were more keen for compromise and stuff, they formed what became called the Mensheviks. And if you look on slide 18, this has actually come from the textbook, it's got on here some of the main differences between these two groups. So you've got the Menshevik view on the left, the Bolshevik view on the right. So, for example, if you look on this slide, you've got revolution, the Menshevik view, but that Russia's not ready yet. We need to prepare, if you like, Russia for this revolution. We haven't had the bourgeoisie stage yet. We're going to we can't miss out Marxist 5 stages. Where you've got the Bolshevik view, which said, well, to hell with this stage 5, let's just get on with it, essentially. You've got the party view. So the Mensheviks wanted a mass organisation with lots of members, and they wanted to work with other political parties. The Bolsheviks, no, we need to have a small, dedicated elite who can just get on with the job, essentially. Decision making, again, the Bolshevik view, this idea of democratic centralism, which basically means that a small elite will actually make the decisions. Then in terms of strategy, you've got the Mensheviks who want to work with other parties, who want to work with trade unions, who want to build up support over a long period of time, whereas you've got the Bolsheviks who are kind of no cooperation, we can get on with it, let's just do it. Okay, so the long and short of all this me gabbiting on is that the Revolutionary Party, the SD party in Russia, split. Okay, and you ended up with the Mensheviks who wanted to educate people and wanted to work with other parties, and then you had the Bolshevik Party that formed, which were much more radical, much more run by a small elite who wanted to take over Russia, organised by this small elite. Okay, I hope that's kind of clear. Again, slide 14 to 18 kind of is the basis of that. With me yabbiting on, the good thing about YouTube is you can pause it and stuff when I stop yabbing about bits and look at stuff and all the rest of it. But that should hopefully give you a little bit of an idea anyway as to what was happening with these opposition parties to the Tsar. And these ideas of Bolshevism is really important for Lenin's ideas because Lenin actually led this group, and it tells us what some of Lenin's key ideas were. You have a small elite who make decisions. You don't work with other parties, and we need to have this violent way in order to seize power and get rid of the Tsar. There's no point in compromising, chatting, and all the rest of it. And that kind of style and that kind of belief of Lenin is kind of what he kind of does once he's actually in charge of Russia after 1918. And again, you might say, is that really different to the Tsars? Because they were run by a small elite who used violence against opposition and believed that their views were the right views. Quite a few similarities there, you might argue. Okay, so slide 19 gives here some of the key kind of views, if you like, of Marxism and Leninism. Okay, so have a quick look through those. I suggest from these slides I just bored you on that you take some notes from it. Okay, there's not space in the booklet, Liz hasn't put a spacing in, but make some notes, do some nice diagrams. If you can or want to print out these 5 slides and annotate them or something like that, then do so. If you want to write it up in your own words in bullet points, then do so. That's what you need to do. Right, in the booklet, what I'd like to do, because quite a lot there for you to get your head around, so I don't want to give you too much kind of blow your little brain cells. is there's 2 pages or a page and a half in your booklet called, let me find it, What Was Lenin's Ideology? Okay, and he says, use Everton Jenkins, Years of Russia, 110 to 112. Okay, and you'll see there are, how many is there? There's 7 questions. There's a couple with A's and B's, so I suppose it's actually about 9 questions. Okay. All I want you to do is read Evans and Jenkins on those pages. It's on Moodle. It's called, let me just bring it up on my Moodle page. What is it? Evans and Jenkins, Chapter 4, The Last Years of Autocracy. I think it's that one. I'll just double check. Is it Chapter 4? I should have checked before I did this, really, shouldn't I? That would have been more sensible. Yeah, so that Chapter 4 one, if you scan down to page 112, wherever it is, there, yeah, it's all on there. You got all the information which you need to do those questions. This is a bit complicated, this little bit, so any questions on it, anything you're unsure about, just email me, and I'll try and do my best to help you. But that's what you need to do for probably next Monday, won't it? Well, either Monday or Tuesday. I might do it on Monday. I'll do the next video and we'll talk about Stalin and Khrushchev, and we'll have a look at, we'll do a bit like the Tsars, basically. We'll look at, how were they similar, how were they different in terms of ideologies. You'll notice Liz has a slide on a thing about writing a paragraph on ideologies as well a bit later on. I think what I will do, because I'm such a nice soul, is that actually I might write it myself, this first paragraph, to show you how you do these thematic paragraphs. And then when we've done all the government stuff, I'll make you write the rest of the essay, essentially. Okay. So what I want you to do for next time is to make sure you get those questions done on Lenin and his ideology, take some notes from what we just talked about, and just make sure that you're happy with everything that we've done so far, and then send me an email if you are unsure about one of these bits and pieces, and then I can always come and assist you. Okay, right, I'll see you next week.